Welcome once again to CAF Warbird Tube. We are glad to have you with us tonight. And joining us once again is one of our favorite historians, Ross Sharp. Ross, great to have you on the show again tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, Steve, as always.
Well, in our last episode, we took a look at the first half of the Supermarine Spitfire's history. But what are we going to talk about tonight?
Well, we're going to get into the arrival of the American engine, the Packard Merlin. Okay. We're going to go into Seafires and how they happened, floatplanes. We're going to get very heavily navalized towards the end, and then a couple of birds that I don't think many people have heard about: the Spiteful, and the Seafang, that was the last inspiration of the Spitfire line. By the way, One of them hit 494 miles an hour, so lots to talk about.
All right, well, let's jump into it. Tonight is episode number 222, and as we said, this is part 2 of our series on the Supermarine Spitfire. And whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we are very happy to have you with us tonight. As always, if you enjoy what you see, please spread the word across your favorite social media platforms. Now, Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. To find out more about the CAF, our events, our aircraft, where they're out on tour, making tour stops for rides, they're also at air shows, just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, you might have some questions. Just put those in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them either while we're on the air talking about it, or we'll save some time at the end before we sign off. So with that, we pick up the story of the Spitfire. So, Ross, let's take it away.
Okay, thanks, Steve. From the Spitfire 5 to immortality. The potted history of the second part of the Spitfire story, or how to overcome adversity and adversaries. And by the way, the shot on that side is one I took of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Spitfire PR Mark 19 in a post-war marking. It's very pretty.
Yes, indeed.
The Spitfire Mark 6, Citius Altius Fortius, faster, higher, stronger, the original motto of the Olympics in 1894 as proposed by the Baron Pierre de Coubertin, could well apply to the Spitfire Mark 6. We left our story with the Mark 5, that workhorse of the early war years. Unfortunately, the south of England was at risk from high-flying Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft, such as the diesel-engine Junkers 86P. So the Spitfire 6 was devised to combat this threat, based on the earlier Mark 5B design. The pressure cabin was a must, and Supermarines and the Royal Aircraft Establishment worked together on the design of this new feature. Here is a Mark 6 Bravo Romeo 579, coded Oscar November Hotel, of number 124 Squadron. Note the large cabin air intake, part of the pressurization system, below the exhaust stubs in this photograph. Other units to fly the Mark 6 included 234 Madras Presidency Squadron, based at RAF Skabray in Orkney Island, Scotland, to cover the Royal Navy's fleet base at Scapa Flow.
What was the service ceiling on that aircraft?
On this thing, you get it up to about around about 38, 39. It had extended wingtips, as you can see, and obviously a heavily boosted engine, but it was designed basically just to deal with very high altitude intruders.
Okay.
Changes to produce the Mark 6. The pressure cabin extended from the firewall to the rear of the cockpit, and a non-sliding canopy was fitted to minimize leaks. A high-rated Merlin 47, 1,415 horsepower at 14,500 feet, driving a 4-bladed Jablo Rotol propeller, that's a wooden one, gave a maximum speed of 364 at 22,000. Extended wingtips gave a ceiling of 40,000. The 100 only Mark 6 served mostly with UK-based squadrons, although some of them saw a bit of action over the Middle East. Armament was 2 20mm cannon with just 60 rounds each and 4 303 Browning machine guns. Spitfire 6 Alpha Bravo 534 was delivered in March 1942 and served with number 616 County of South Yorkshire Squadron Auxiliary Air Force from May of that year. It was lost providing air cover for the Dieppe raid, Operation Jubilee, on the 19th of August 1942, after the squadron had moved to RAF Kenley. I am proud to have been the last liaison officer to number 616 Squadron Association whilst at RAF Finningley. I still live in South Yorkshire. LF-5B, clipped, clapped and cropped, a very special type of Spitfire in Normandy. By 1942, Spitfire Mark 5B and C were finding themselves well outclassed by the Focke-Wulf 190. Many of these older machines were converted to the low-level fighter-bomber role, ready for the coming European invasion. Their wingtips were clipped to increase roll rate. The supercharger impeller vanes were cropped on their new Merlin 45M, 50M or 55M engines, which gave 1,585 horsepower at only 2,750 feet, better than a Mark 9 at that altitude. They reached 350 miles an hour at 5,900 feet. These were described by pilots as clipped, clapped and cropped. Despite this, many gave excellent service in Normandy. You see to the right Flight Lieutenant Jürgen Kjeldbæk. Note the Danish flag of 510 Squadron Normandy on his very well-worn Spitfire 5B. Just look at the oil-stained drop tank. It's practically black. But nevertheless, they kept on soldiering on. The PR world evolves. Spitfire PR-11, Papa Lima 965. Mapping and bomb damage assessment sorties were still being flown by Allied PR aircraft even as the end of hostilities in Europe approached. Flight Lieutenant Gordon Bellaby DFC in Spitfire PR-11, Papa Lima 965 of number 16 Squadron Royal Air Force approached Hanover on the 21st of March 1945 at 26,000 feet, and I read from the operational record book of 16 Squadron. Did 4 runs. At end of last run saw one Focke-Wulf 190 2,000 feet below. He didn't see me. 8th Air Force was being attacked by jets near Hanover. Covered Osnabrück with the last of my film as a possible train of V2s were there. As I finished, suddenly 4 Me-262s passed under my tail around 200 feet below. But as they didn't see me, amazingly, retired at high speed. No other incidents. I landed at Maelsbroek, that's near the capital of Belgium, at 0945. Arthur Roberts survived, as you can see, and still flies beautifully. Spitfire 7, a true high-altitude fighter with the Merlin 60 engine. The Spitfire Mark 6 had, as in the case of many other Marks, been an emergency solution to a pressing problem. On the other hand, the Spitfire Mark 7 was a true high-altitude machine. It took advantage of the 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger on the Merlin 60 series engine. This engine was 6 inches longer and heavier than previous Merlins and needed new engine bearers, a 4-bladed propeller, a strengthened fuselage, leading-edge fuel tanks, a retractable tail wheel, a double-glazed hood, 2 enlarged underwing radiators and a modified wing and tail. It's a lot of modifications. It carried twice the number of cannon shells and reached 408 miles per hour with a ceiling of no less than 43,000 feet. Only 140 Mark 7 were built, serving in Europe and the Middle East, some with number 616 Squadron, those are our guys. Here is Alpha Bravo 450, the first of the breed. Refinement reaches the South China Sea, the Mark 8. The Mark 8 was probably the most refined of the late Merlin engine Spitfires, using either a 63 or 66 series engine. It incorporated all the improvements of the Mark 6 and Mark 7. It replaced earlier Spitfires in SEAC, that would be CBI. Note the dark blue roundel with a white center. That's obviously to prevent blue on blue attacks. Here is a side view of Grey Nurse Zulu Papa Yankee serialed A Alpha 5867, a Mark 8 Spitfire of number 457 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, in flight over the South China Sea. It is being flown by Flying Officer Fred Inger. Shark's teeth have been painted on the front of the aircraft. The print is inscribed, I'm sorry it's faded, to Captain S. Appleby, FELO, with best wishes from 457 Spitfire Squadron, Labuan, 1945, and is signed by Flight Lieutenant D.H. McLean, the commanding officer. There had been a previous Zulu Papa Yankee, Alpha 58615. That one, however, had a red spinner, but that must have crashed for them to reissue the serial. Another quick fix, Spitfire, the Mark 9. I think you're getting used to the idea now that there's lots of fixes going on. Just as the Spitfire 5 had been a quick fix whilst the RAF was waiting for the Mark 3, which never came as we covered in part 1, the solution to the Mark 5 versus Focke-Wulf 190 problem came in part by rapidly converting Mark 5 airframes by removing the 40 series Merlin engine and adding the Merlin 60 series engine and a 4-bladed propeller and extra radiator, because of course it was putting out an awful lot more heat. The effect was instant. Depending on the rating of the Merlin, rated LF for low fighter, F for fighter, or HF for high altitude fighter, the aircraft could now be tuned for altitude performance, e.g. 416 miles per hour at 27,500 feet. The replica Mark 9, shown here, represents the aircraft of then Wing Commander Johnny Johnson, the RAF's highest scoring pilot against the Focke-Wulf 190. I met Air Vice Marshal Johnson, as he became, on numerous occasions at RAF Finningley, because actually he became president of our association. Nice guy.
Certainly was. And talk to me a little bit about the canopy, or is it just the reflection in the
It's the reflection.
Okay.
But basically, you're right. There was a bulge canopy, and you can also see immediately in front of that canopy, you'll see a small Canadian maple leaf symbol. Yeah. And that's odd because, of course, Johnny wasn't a Canadian. It's the fact that he was the commanding officer of that particular wing, which had 3 Canadian Spitfire squadrons in it. And of course, you see the very prominent D-Day stripes going from the canopy backwards along the wing. They were, of course, you look in those, they're absolutely pristine and totally straight edged all the way down. No, they weren't in reality. Some of them were actually put on with mop and bucket because Eisenhower's directive came down on the evening, right, of the 5th. So this was a real slap on the paint job. Right, well, here's the man himself. Wing Commander Johnny Johnson, Royal Air Force, with Spitfire 9C, Mike Kilo 392, and Sally, his black Labrador. Here we can see the RAF's top scorer against the Focke-Wulf 190. Wing Commander J.E. Johnson, along with his dog Sally, is standing on what was a wheat field in Brasville, Normandy, and is now, on the 31st of July 1944, a landing ground. He was CO of number 127 wing, comprising, as I said, 3 RCAF Spitfire squadrons. Like many other units equipped with the Spitfire 9C, 2 20mm cannon, 4 303 Browning machine guns, by now they had become fighter bomber units, as the main RAF day fighters at this stage had become the Griffon engine Spitfires, late war versions, and the new Hawker Tempest 5 with its incredibly powerful sabre. The ribbons on his tunic, which you can't quite see from there, indicate a distinguished service order and 2 bars, so that's 3 awards of the DSO, and a distinguished flying cross and bar. He would retire as an Air Vice Marshal. By the way, not before he'd flown sabres in Korea.
Wow.
Heck of a guy. Yeah. The arrival of the Big Banger. It's a bit like getting a Hemi for breakfast, you know. A Rolls-Royce Griffon. The prototype Mark IV was intended to be the Spitfire powered by the single-stage early Griffon Mark IIB, driving a 4-bladed Rotol propeller. However, things did not work out, and it was only when Focke-Wulf 190A tip and run raiders began hitting South Coast towns that an urgent solution was sought. So, guess what happened, Steve? That's right. 50 Mark V and 50 Mark VII airframes were given stronger and longer fuselages with broad chord fins and rudders. The 37-litre 1,735 horsepower single-stage Griffon 3 or 4 engines rotated anti-clockwise, which meant pilots were more used to the Merlin, often had initial problems because it was the opposite way round. So if you took off and fed in rudder as if you were flying a Merlin engine Spitfire, you just ground looped. You know, it took a while for people to get used to it. Called the Spitfire Mark 12, the new machine was issued to numbers 41 and 91 squadrons at Hawk Inch, who began to take a toll on the FW-190. Speed was 393 miles an hour at 18,000 feet. We're starting to get up there at this point. Here is the prototype, Delta Papa 845, showing its clipped wings and the bulged engine cowlings. Obviously, if you're trying to shoehorn a 37-litre V12 into the space where you used to have a 27-litre V12, it takes a lot of engineering expertise. Yes. New engine bearers, it affects the CG. That's why the Mark 12 was an emergency, and they only produced 100. The Yanks are coming. Enter the Packard Merlin. Henry Ford Sr. had refused a request from the British Purchasing Commission in Washington to build the Rolls-Royce Merlin for the Royal Air Force, even though when that request was made, the war situation was dire. Strangely enough, though, Ford UK had no such problems. However, the UK would need every Merlin it could get, and so it turned to the Packard motor car company, I should say. Soon, thousands of V1650 two-stage, two-speed supercharged Packard Merlins were flowing off the lines. As well as revolutionizing the P-51 Mustang, by the way, I was brought up 8 miles away from the experimental Rolls-Royce shop where the very first Packard Merlin conversion took place. It powered the Lancaster Mark III bomber and gave a new lease of life to the Spitfire Mark IX design, turning it into the Spitfire Mark 16. It's a nice shot of a V1650 there. This one's a bit sad, unfortunately. Spitfire Mark 16E Lowback TE311 Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, Royal Air Force Coningsby. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight of the Royal Air Force is based at RAF Coningsby and has 5 airworthy Spitfires at the moment. Tango Echo 311 seen here at its home base. The aircraft was built as a low-back, that's cut down Mark 16E, powered by a Packard Merlin, and of course as such it had 2 20mm cannon and for the first time 2.5-inch Brownings, and strangely enough the Brownings occupied the inner slots and the 20mm cannon were outboard of those two. Anyway, it's up until recently it has worn the livery of number 322 Dutch Squadron, including that squadron's nose art of Polly Grey, an African grey parrot, and the unit's code letters 3 Whiskey Mike, as well as the Dutch national marking of an inverted orange triangle, and those markings are still on the port side of the aircraft. Now finished in memoriam to squadron leader Mark Long, who was killed in the crash of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Spitfire Mark IX, Mike Kilo 356, on the 25th of May 2024. It is coded Lima November Golf with the Royal Air Force roundel in the middle spelling Long. And it also has his name in small letters under the starboard side of the cockpit. You can just see a white stripe immediately below the quarter light there, and a squadron leader's pennant. Unfortunately, he crashed on takeoff and was killed. A very, very sad day for the whole nation. Changing sides in a time of change. The Royal Air Force had formed number 352 brackets Yankee close brackets squadron from anti-fascists, mostly Yugoslav partisans, willing to fight Axis forces, both German and Italian, in their homeland. At first, the squadron had Hurricanes, but eventually a mix of Spitfire 5B and 5C fighter bombers arrived. Initially based on Cannes in Italy, they were very active over their homeland. They had to make a sea crossing every time they wanted to perform an attack. Here you can see a line of Spitfire 5B at Cannes. The aircraft are being readied for their first escort sortie over Yugoslavia. Note the red star in the center of the roundel and the smaller red star on the tail fin. You can see that easily on the aircraft just at the bottom of the picture. This unit eventually became part of the first fighter group Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia Air Force. So yes, as I said, nothing like changing sides. Flight into turmoil. Spitfire 9 at the time of the Greek Civil War. Following Italy's surrender to the Allies in 1943, the whole of the Aegean and the countries at the eastern end of the Mediterranean seemed to be in turmoil. Greek partisans, from monarchist groups to communists, had been fighting each other, and even the arrival of British forces into Athens had not been able to prevent a civil war breaking out 1946 to 1949. This Spitfire 9 is the only survivor from a batch of 77 acquired by the Hellenic Air Force and was flown out to Greece in 1948, i.e. when hostilities were still taking place, by a friend of mine, Flight Lieutenant George Dunn, DFC, Legion d'Honneur, after it was restored at Biggin Hill, and that's at Biggin there. It has become a national treasure in Greece. Operation Velveta, dangerous ferry flight into war. During the establishment of the State of Israel, there was an urgent need for aircraft to defend the fledgling state. In 1948, arrangements were made to buy a quantity of Spitfires from Czechoslovakia, but how to get them to Israel? A covert ferry flight was set up in small batches of Spits from Czechoslovakia to a former Luftwaffe base in Yugoslavia, where all guns, radios, etc. were stripped out to save weight, and extra fuel tanks fitted for the long over-water flight to Israel. Some aircraft were lost, along with pilots. At least one crashed in the mountains, but the Spitfires defended the new state. Here we see Supermarine Spitfire LF Mark 9E. Now that tells you that the Merlin was rated for low fighter, and the Mark 9E tells you that it was armed with one cannon and one Browning .5 machine gun in each wing. It was coded T Tango Echo 579, former Israeli Air Force 20-28, and that's painted as 20-11, and it's at the Israeli Air Force Museum in Hatzarim. The photograph is credited to Oren Rosen. Thank you very much. You might be wondering why the rudder is painted red and white stripes. Yeah, well, that's because unfortunately the Egyptians also had Spitfires. So to avoid blue on blue, out comes the paint pot again. Okay, Steve. The interim Spitfires march on. Welcome to the Mark 14. Once more, Supermarine wants to produce a definitive type, this time with the new two-stage Griffon engine. This was to be the Type 356 Spitfire Mark 21. It was recognized that this might take some serious development work, so no less than 6 Mark 8 airframes were set to be modified. One of them, a Juliet Fox 321, was fitted with a contraprop to lessen torque effects. Unfortunately, by the way, that caused some other problems like failure of the reduction gear. As before, the interim Spits were so good that they were produced as the Mark 14. With some strengthening, a bigger fin and rudder, and the C-wing, later the E-wing, most had the high back rear fuselage, but a few were low back, as you can see here. The 2,050 horsepower Griffon 65 gave a top speed of 448 miles an hour at 28,000 feet. The photograph, by the way, was taken in March 1945, towards the end of the war. Truly first-class fighter. Spitfire PR-19, Papa Mike 631, Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, Royal Air Force Coningsby. Obviously, the Royal Air Force wanted a far-ranging, high-performance PR aircraft with Griffon power. The PR-19 was almost identical to the F-14, but with cameras, and the highly modified C-wing carried a lot of extra fuel. It made covering Berlin and farther targets routine. The Griffon 66 gave a top speed of 445 miles an hour, a range of 1,500 miles, and a ceiling in excess of 43,000 feet. Built in 1946, she missed World War II, but served as a Met research aircraft out of Wood Vale in the north of England on what were known as thumb flights. This stood for temperature and humidity flights. It joined what became the BBMF in 1957, and she was in the film Battle of Britain in 1968, repainted of course, and after an exciting spell simulating a P-51 in dogfights against RAF Lightning jet fighters in 1964. You might be wondering, but there was an armed confrontation against the state of Indonesia at the time, which had P-51s. So you will see why below. It means that we'll get it later. The Irish Seafire Spitfire story. In 1946, the Irish government asked to buy Spitfire Mark 9s to form a fighter squadron. The British government refused, so the Irish settled for Seafire Mark 3 aircraft. 12 of these were denavalized, arrestor gear out, and the wing folding mechanism was locked. And they formed No. 1 Fighter Squadron, Irish Air Corps at Gormanston, County Meath. The aircraft were delivered from 1948 through 1949. Also, 2 Spitfire Trainer 9s were bought to act as transition/continuation trainers. The Seafires were utilized until 1955. Here you can see a Mark 9 trainer in Irish Air Corps markings on Casement Aerodrome, Baldonnel, County Dublin. One of those aircraft is still active to this day. The last Spitfire flight in conflict, PR-19, Malayan emergency. It is a matter of record that the last operational sortie by a Spitfire in RAF service took place on the 1st of April, the anniversary of the founding of the Royal Air Force in 1918. In 1954, No. 81 Squadron was already converting to Meteor PR-10 jets, but still had 3 Spitfire PR-19s left. PS-888 took off from Royal Air Force Seletar, that's on the island of Singapore, to photograph a suspected rebel camp in the jungles of Malaysia. Flown by Squadron Leader Swabi with the 81 Squadron, this final flight was commemorated by having the name The Last painted on the aircraft's nose by one of the fitters. He borrowed some white paint, apparently. Later, the 3 Spitfires were sold to Thailand, and 3 Thai pilots, without any conversion time, rather shakily took off and flew them away to Thailand. Now, this I told you about earlier. English Electric Lightning, I know that's an F3, I can tell that by the under-fuselage tank and the red top infrared missiles. On the ground at Royal Air Force Binbrook, where we see a Lightning F3, 2 red top homing missiles, plus a 40 millimeter Aden gun pack, versus unarmed Spitfire Mark P-19 from the Battle of Britain Memorial flight. The idea, as I said, was to simulate a Lightning F6, which was the current fighter, versus P-51 in combat. The Spitfire's best hope of survival, apparently, was to get the Lightning into a low and slow dogfight, where you actually get the gun sight onto it, apparently. Technically, these were the last operational sorties by a Spitfire. Shame it was against the home team, but there it is.
So were there any actual encounters between the F6 and the P-51s?
No. It turns out that most of the action took place on the ground between special forces infiltration. They were trying to get into the crown colony of Brunei from what was the Indonesian part of that island. And there were some clashes. There were quite a few deaths, and then various memorials set up. But no, there were no actual combat sorties, thank goodness.
Yeah. And seeing the fuel tank under the Lightning, did Spitfires ever have were ever fitted with external tanks? Chris was wondering.
We've seen one in Normandy already.
Okay,
right.
Oh, that's right.
The one with the oil soak, but there was a much bigger tank fitted for fighters called the slipper tank. It looked rather like a cut-down bathtub, and the front end had a cutout to go over the carburetor air intake at the front. And that was about 90 gallons in a slipper tank, which gave them quite a lot of range. Also, towards the end of the war, wing tanks, in some cases, were fitted on what were the bomb racks on the fighter bombers. But no, and of course the naval guys used them all the time. But strangely enough, the Spitfire was arranged as a strictly interceptor when it was first came out, with only 90 gallons of a large fuel tank underneath the pilot. And Supermarines wanted to fit a much bigger tank in the rear fuselage and were told no by the Air Ministry. It would be unstable, and Supermarines fitted the tank and then proceeded to take off from the south of England and flew to Scotland and back, thereby proving that we could get to Berlin and back, but it was too late in the war by that stage. Pity.
Yeah. So with that reasoning, then the Spitfires were not used as bomber escorts at all.
Well, the 8th Air Force, when they had their three Spitfire squadrons, including number 133, they were equipped with Spitfire Mark 5Bs. And there's a rather harrowing tale that they were told to escort B-17s on raids, and all that the 109s did was literally orbit the, out of range of the Spits until the Spits had to turn for home and then fall on the unescorted B-17s. Yeah, that's why the P-38 arrived, then the 47, and then, of course, the 51.
Yes.
Right, a sad loss. We seem to have a lot of sadness these days. David Moore, Rolls-Royce Spitfire Mark 14, Romeo Mike 689. On the 27th of June 1992, the Rolls-Royce owned Spitfire 14, Romeo Mike 8689 crashed at Woodford Air Show, resulting in the death of the company pilot David Moore. I had the privilege of knowing this fine gentleman when I worked at Echo Golf November X-Ray, and he was based there with the Rolls-Royce Spit. And his loss was a tragedy to his family, of course, and felt keenly by those in the UK heritage aviation community, as well as the public at large. Here is Romeo Mike 689 being flown by David on the front cover of that wonderful book, and I can't praise it high enough, Spitfire, The History by Key Publishing. Yeah, I was on that sortie, by the way. As a shocking reminder of how dangerous exhibition flying can be, both the Mark 14 and the PR-11 in this photograph and their respective pilots on the day are no more, all lost in crashes. So yeah, there's a price to be paid for attending an air show sometimes. Really is. Lovely man David was. Right, the last Spitfire Mark to see World War II service, the F.21. The wing of the F.21 had to have greater torsional stiffness and strength, because obviously the power was climbing up and up and up, and the weight. So this became the first Spitfire to move away from the classic elliptical wing formulated by Beverly Shenstone, the Canadian aerodynamicist. Lima Alpha 255 was taken on charge by No. 1 F Squadron, Royal Air Force, in March 1945. As well as the stronger wing, the tail surfaces were enlarged and the fuselage stiffened. This image shows the new outer undercarriage doors, which you can just see down below the wing there. They smoothed out the gap where the partially exposed tyre and wheel used to be able to be seen, rather like a 737, if you see what I mean. This Spit goes wherever No. 1 Squadron is based. It's theirs. It's not owned by the Royal Air Force. The squadron owns it. And it's currently at Royal Air Force Lossiemouth in Scotland, where No. 1 is with its F-35s. They're on the quick reaction alert for the north of the country, and you've got 617 Squadron for the southern half of the country at Royal Air Force Markham. I visited there about a month ago. No. 91 Squadron took delivery of the type in April 1945, just in time to perform armed recce patrols over the Dutch coast and the estuary of the River Scheldt. 2 F-21s claimed to have strafed and sunk a German midget sub before the end of hostilities. So there you have it. Post-war and getting long in the tooth, the Spitfire F-22. The prototype F-22 first flew from the Castle Bromwich factory in March 1945. Technically, this makes it a World War II aircraft, a bit like the Bearcat being a World War II aircraft. But none were delivered to the Royal Air Force until after the war ended. The Griffon 61 or 65 drove a 5-bladed propeller, which was even larger than that on the F-21. Peacetime squadrons of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force, note that the Auxiliary Air Force had been granted the title Royal by King George VI in recognition of its wartime service. They utilised some of the 278 aircraft built. Here we see an F-22 of No. 607, County of Durham Squadron, Royal Auxiliary Air Force. This unit had some F-22s on hand from January 1949 to June 1951. It is carrying the race number 4, as it is taking part in the Cooper Trophy race between Royal Auxiliary Air Force squadrons of the UK over the former Royal Air Force Lindt airfield in Kent. It's a good shot, actually, of the 22. Last of the line, the post-war F-24. The F-24 was basically a modified series of the 22 with only 54 built. The last Spitfire, Victor November 496, left the South Marston production line in Swindon, where I used to live, on the 24th of February 1949 and was delivered straight to No. 6 maintenance unit into store. The cost of each aircraft was £7,442. Now that's roughly $30,000 at the time in real money, because it was $4 to the pound at the time, with a ferry flight cost of circa £15 or $60 to you. With meteors and vampires flying from the factories, there seemed to be little use for these Spits. They saw limited service with the Royal Air Force. However, number 80 Squadron was a Tempest unit in Germany when suddenly they were issued F-24 Spits. That's a bit of a retrograde step, and sent to Hong Kong at the time of the Chinese Civil War. It's seen here at summer camp, probably in the New Territories, Hong Kong. Nothing like being under tents in the summer, Steve. And they were used until 1955. Presumably their role was to see that the Chinese Civil War didn't spill out over Hong Kong's boundary. Fortunately, one of the 16 former Hong Kong aircraft is now on exhibition in its all-silver finish in the Imperial War Museum at Duxford. The Sea Spitfire, as its original name was, aka the Seafire. Their Lordships of the Admiralty have been asking for Spitfires since 1938, but since their aviation, believe it or not, was still controlled by the Royal Air Force at the time, they had to soldier on with Gladiator biplanes and the slow two-seat Fairy Former. And the Seafire 3 gave excellent service. However, as you can see, the test examples proved a point, and they gave excellent service at Salerno, providing fighter cover from a carrier deck offshore. Despite having excellent sea level performance from its Merlin engine and folding wings, it had two fatal flaws. The long nose meant that a careful, curving approach to the deck had to be flown, a bit like with a Corsair, and the undercarriage, well, it just wasn't strong enough. This is a Seafire 3 landing on HMS Indefatigable. Basically, the Seafire was a great interceptor, had marvellous climb and heavy punch with 20mm cannon. It went off to tackle kamikaze Zeros, and you could shoot a Zero and then come back and crash a Seafire. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio, unfortunately. It wasn't quite as bad as that, but it just wasn't. The Seafire undercarriage wasn't sorted out until post-war, and the jets were coming in by the time the 47 arrived, unfortunately.
It really does show the narrow gear and how really incompatible it was. Totally. For carrier operation.
That landing, an FM2 or a Hellcat would have just shrugged that off, you know. Yep. So what? And you'll see how the Batman is literally easing it down, you know, please, don't break it. Bang, everywhere, you know. A shame, really, because, as I said, great interceptor. Right, a beautifully restored Seafire LF3C. The first with folding wings. Supermarine Seafire LF3 PP972, seen here landing at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford, was built by Westland Aircraft, one of a batch of 250, in 1944. Issued to 809 Naval Squadron, Fleet Air Arm, in November 1944. 809 Squadron went aboard HMS Stalker, a Royal Navy escort carrier built in American shipyards, by the way, and left for the Far East. HMS Stalker and 809 provided fighter cover for the occupation of Rangoon, Operation Dracula. Papa 972 is seen here in typical FAA markings of the late war, in that the FAA roundels have had their red centres omitted. Several British aircraft had been, unfortunately, shot down by US fighters in theatre, and had typical United States style bars added either side of the roundel to reinforce whose side she was on. But yeah, very nicely turned out aircraft. The Seafire F-17 Sierra X-Ray 338 number 767 Naval Air Squadron. The FAA really wanted a fast-climbing interceptor in the later stages of World War II to dominate the air around its fleet carriers in the Pacific, and they thought a Griffon engine Seafire would do the trick. The Seafire 15, with its 1,850 horsepower Griffon 6, equipped numbers 802, 803, 805 and 806 squadrons, but they were all working up in the UK when VJ Day came. So the Spitfire 17 differed only by having the low back and all-round vision canopy compared to the 15 with the high back and, like I said, the usual canopy. This aircraft is now owned by UK Navy Wings, a body that keeps UK heritage naval aviation flying. This lovely Seafire 17 is in the colours of 767 Naval Air Squadron and is being prepped for flight at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford Airfield. The last of the breed, Seafire F Mark 47 of 778 Squadron Royal Navy, taking a wire, HMS Illustrious. The last of the Seafire family, the F Mark 47 and its FR reconnaissance equivalent, was radically different to its predecessors. As you can see, the undercarriage legs are set wider apart, and they're much stronger as well. And the last version of the Rolls-Royce Griffon 87 had Rolls-Royce fuel injection also. The contraprops eliminated torque problems, so it's a much better aircraft. When land-based, number 800 Squadron conducted strikes in Malaya against rebel camps from October 1949 to February 1950. 6 months later, 26 F-47 saw action in Korea, this time from the deck of HMS Triumph when she joined the United States 7th Fleet on station off Korea. Not bad, 2 wars in 1 deployment. That was the last though. However, when HMS Triumph got back to the UK, number 800 Squadron re-equipped with the Attacker, Supermarine's first jet fighter. A breaker of records right to the end, the Supermarine Spiteful. During 1941, Supermarines were asked to investigate a development of the Spitfire with a laminar flow wing. Hello, clone of P-51D, we say to ourselves at this time. Work progressed slowly, delayed by the war, but by June 1944, a prototype was ready. The design had so many changes, including a new fuselage, that a new name was needed, and Spiteful was chosen. Only 8 machines were finished by the time World War II ended, and a larger production order was cancelled. Virtually hand-built, Spitefuls performed to specification, but it is doubtful if the benefits would translate across to mass production, plus jets with a future. In 1947, the definitive version of the Spitfire-like fighter, the Spiteful 16, powered by a 3-stage blown Griffon 101 engine, and that's something, achieved 494 miles an hour over Boscombe Down at 28,000 feet. This was only beaten by the experimental XP-47J at 504. And we're talking production machine here with full war equipment, radios and everything else. So this was really something. Here we see the 3rd Royal Air Force Supermarine Spiteful, an F-14, serial number Romeo Bravo 517. Barely a Seafire, the Seafang, a navalised version of the Spiteful, the Seafang, with folding outer wing panels, arrestor gear and cameras was built post-war, despite the fact that in May 1947, test pilot Mike Lithgow successfully performed deck trials in Victor Bravo 895 on HMS Illustrious. It was decided that the Seafang offered no major advantages over the Seafire 47 that we'd just seen, and the project was cancelled. Spitfire oddities. We're coming towards the end now. Number 1, the Spitfire 9 floatplane, the fastest World War II floatplane. We have already covered the Mark V floatplane conversions, but the expanding Pacific War showed renewed interest, this time in a Mark IX version. June 1944 saw the first flights of Mike Juliet 892 intended for service in the Pacific, with Folland Aircraft again having undertaken the conversion work. Top speed was very respectable, and at 377 miles per hour, this was the fastest floatplane of World War II. Rapid conquest of Pacific Islands and huge US carrier fleets in the Pacific made Mike Juliet 892 redundant, and she was quietly struck off charge on the 22nd of November 1945. Still handsome beast. Spitfire oddities number 2, two-seat Spitfires. Two-seat Spitfires were a rarity in World War II. Many Spitfire pilots were given a cockpit briefing, a quick pat on the shoulder, and then told, "Off you go." We are fortunate that the last Spitfire high-speed trainer prototype, Mike Tango 818 from 1944, still flies. 2 other two-seaters from the Irish Air Corps are still active, and more are being created each year, it seems, as the growth in the flying a Spitfire business in the UK continues. Here is a Spitfire TR9 taxiing at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford. Mention must be made of the in-the-field conversion of some Mark IX Spitfires by the Russians. These were used as fast courier liaison aircraft. Spitfire oddities number 3, the ultimate hybrid. In World War II, aircraft from all sides changed sides. Crashed examples of foreign aircraft could sometimes be made serviceable so that they could be studied. But here is a Spitfire Mark V that was taken to another level. Echo November 830 crashed while on a sortie over France. The pilot became a POW, and the aircraft was rebuilt for test purposes by the Luftwaffe. The Merlin 45 was taken out, and a Daimler-Benz 605A, the same engine as the BF-109G, was fitted, along with a 24-volt electrical system that was standard for the Luftwaffe. It was flown against Luftwaffe aircraft, and German pilots said that it was faster than the BF-109G and handled better. Sadly, the aircraft was destroyed in an air raid by United States Army Air Force bombers. Still going strong. Always remember those that went before. Organizations like the CAF and the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight strive to commemorate those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the name of freedom. The Spitfire, to me, is always inspiring.
And I would have to agree with you. It is an inspiring aircraft and an inspiring story as well. And Ross, thank you for sharing the history of the Supermarine Spitfire with us. We've got some questions from some of our audience members. Mark is wondering, and this is something we had kind of talked about before we came on the air, it seems like there are many more preserved Spitfires than Hurricanes. Is that because the Spitfire airframe was produced for a longer time or some other reasons?
Well, you're absolutely right. Mark's got it in one. The Hurricane was a half a generation earlier than the Spitfire. It flew earlier. It didn't have as much developmental potential. It had a lot of wood in terms of form as in the rear fuselage. And indeed, the earlier Hurricanes actually had fabric-covered wings rather than metal. And it was taken out of service because they wanted to start building the Typhoon and then the Tempest.
Okay.
The last of the Hurricanes soldiered on in CBI until 1945, but it was just a couple of squadrons. And they rapidly faded from view after the war, quickly scrapped. And not only that, because the Spitfire was all metal, it tended to last longer, right?
But there are some that are flying again, right? We just
absolutely. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight
yes.
have two. Lima Fox 363 is my favorite. We'll see that later in an upcoming program, I might add. Trolling that one. But yes, there are a growing number of Spitfires. I think we're up to about 8 in Europe at the moment, and some elsewhere. Obviously, there's Spitfires in Canada. There's at least a nice one there, and there are some down under in New Zealand. Oh, by the way, Australia only had one Hurricane. That was all. But yes, there are only a few compared to the more than 80 Spitfires now flying.
John's wondering how much of the wing actually folded on the Navy versions.
Yeah, it was complex. About 80% folded. You had a horizontal break in about 2 feet out from the wing root, and then as the wing folded vertically, you folded the tip down towards the deck, 90 degrees that way. So that's what you would do on the Spit. Difficult, particularly if you had a strong wind over the deck, to put it mildly.
Sure.
Oh, the first lot of Seafires, by the way, were non-folding until they got to the Mark III. So, they were left out in all kinds of weather.
Chris is wondering if Spitfires ever had drop tanks.
Oh, goodness gracious, yes.
Okay.
We showed Chris a photograph of that very badly oil-stained tank on the Mark V, the clip-clapped and cropped Mark V in Normandy. They also had a bigger tank. If you look carefully at that Mark II, and I'm quite pleased with that photograph I took, you'll see that the carburetor, the air intake at the throat of the wing, so to speak, at the leading edge in the center line, they had a thing called a slipper tank of 90 gallons, and that fitted around. It had a cutout that went around that carburetor air intake. And it towards the end, they also had underwing drop tanks on the wing. The PR Spits rarely needed drop tanks for the simple reason they didn't have a complete wet wing, but the whole of the fuselage, the whole of the leading edge of both wings were turned into fuel tanks, and there were other fuel tanks fitted in the wing as well. So they had a stunning range of 1,500 miles or more.
And Chris mentions this as well. For what it's worth, he's 66, still a licensed aircraft mechanic in the States, and sadly, he's never met a Spitfire in person.
Oh dear!
I know, Chris. I don't know where Chris is located, but there are several Spitfires in the United States.
They are indeed. There's a very nice one at Virginia Beach with the Military Aircraft Museum that flies very nicely, if I remember well. If ever he makes it across the pond, a couple of my American friends turned up this year and said, "We've got a spare day in London. What can we do?" I said, "Stay where you are." I drove down with the car, picked them up from the hotel, drove them to the Imperial War Museum at Duxford to see everything, including the wreck of Rudolf Hess's ME-110, and then drove them down to the de Havilland Aircraft Museum to show them around all the World War I, World War II, and post-World War II military and civil stuff there. And then I drove them back to the hotel. and they were asleep by the time they got back.
And Chris, the CAF Southern California wing also has a
Yes.
Spitfire.
Yes.
So yeah, there's a
Seafire 47 as well.
Mm-hmm.
The only Seafire 47 still flying in the world is in America.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Mike is wondering, in the image still going strong, what are the features next to the wheel hinges under the wings?
Let's see. What are the features?
Yeah.
Under the wings, you have individual ejection ports for the machine gun cases, right? That you can see going outwards from the partially covered wheels, right?
Okay.
There's a radio. There's a pitot tube there. You will find aircraft recognition lights for signaling underneath the fuselage. You can see the flaps immediately in front of the oil cooler. The oil cooler is under the port wing. That's the upper one as you're looking at it now. It's the Mark II only had a single radiator on the underneath the starboard wing. That's because the early Merlin didn't need too much in the way of cooling. As the bigger Merlins came in, and the Griffons, of course, it had to have a symmetrical radiator where the oil cooler is now. Let's see, anything else he needs? It's got a fixed tail wheel. That, by the way, is the only surviving Spitfire to see action in the Battle of Britain. It's a Mark II built in 1940 towards the end of the battle, and it actually had sorties during the battle. That's from June through to the end of October in 1940. And as General Arnold said, that's when the RAF took off to save everything, and did.
Yes.
Oh, sorry about this small commercial break, folks. Avert your eyes. And now for something completely different, as Monty Python says. In my advanced years, I've actually branched out. I don't know why at the time. I found out to my amazement that the domain name aviationhistory.uk was available. So I bought it, as you do, on impulse. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, once you've bought it, what do you have to do? Well, my esteemed lady, 4C Creatives, must get the plug-in on the other side of town, Jo, is she's the one who designed my business cards. And she said, yeah, I can turn you out a web page, and I'll even host it for you at a very reasonable price, I might add. So you've got a photograph on the left of one of the few flying Bristol fighters from World War I at the Shuttleworth Trust, along with a genuine World War I Model T, by the way, on that lovely grass airfield. And then, of course, you've got the B-25J Panchito that I love. That was taken at the New Zealand International Air Show when I was living over in the States. Oh, by the way, and of course, I'm now branching out into, whisper it gently, almost, but not quite, professional photography. So I've got an Alamy site with about 400 things. Go and have a look, Steve. Don't buy it, just have a look, okay?
And it's not all airplanes either. I mean, there's a lot of airplane
you've got
pictures.
Antique cars, if you like, looking at a Monte Carlo or a mid-body Ford from 1922, or you've got Roman remains or churches, landscapes, even a Maine Coon cat in there somewhere. So lots and lots of things to look at. So not just about a third aircraft, and the rest they're all good stuff.
Very good. And in just a few hours, you are going to jump on an airplane and come to the States and visit your grandson, and maybe do a few other things.
Here we are, just to prove it. One American passport. Yeah, I've been an American citizen for more than 20 years now, despite the accent. I married a beautiful American girl from Connecticut, and we had 21 wonderful years until, unfortunately, cancer took her about 3 years ago. Yeah. So I sold up and came back here, just so I could annoy a different set of people. But I come back to the States every year to see the grandson, who is now 8 and full of beans, bless his heart. So I'll be seeing Luke in a little while. But I'm going to be speaking at the American Heritage Museum. They have a 2-day symposium on the 13th and 14th coming up. If anybody's in New England, please try and come along and see that, because not just me, there are other speakers and I believe some veterans too. And it's all about the Messerschmitt 262. And I think you might have seen a preview of the presentation, Steve.
Yes, I did.
Yes, yeah. Don't worry, CAF folks will begin to see that at some time or other.
Definitely. Well, Ross, we want to thank you again for being a guest on the show tonight, and safe travels, and hope you enjoy your time here in the States.
I always do, providing I don't cause complete havoc in the first hour by driving on the wrong side of the road, which I always do.
There you go. And thank you for joining us tonight. We'd like to hear any thoughts you have on tonight's episode or any future topics you'd like us to cover. If you'd like to drop us any information, feedback, whatever, just send it to media@cafhq.org. And as always, if you liked what you saw tonight, please share it across your social media platforms and click that subscribe and bell icon on YouTube. You'll get new notifications when our episodes are posted. And until next time, I'm Steve Buss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.